Thanksgiving was always my favorite holiday. There's something about the autumn chill and the smell of roasted turkey that brings back warm memories. This year, though, our family gathering took an unexpected turn, one that I still struggle to believe was real. It started off normally. My parents busied themselves in the kitchen, my younger siblings played in the living room, and I helped set the table. The doorbell rang, a bit early for any of our expected guests. I opened the door to find a man, probably in his early 30s, standing on our porch with a hesitant smile. "Hi, I'm Eric. I know this is out of the blue, but I'm a distant relative. I was hoping I could join you for Thanksgiving," he said. That was strange. I didn't recognize him, but then again, our family was large and scattered. Mom always said Thanksgiving was about opening our doors to family, no matter how distant. So, I let him in. At dinner, Eric was oddly quiet, but whenever he did speak, it was with an eerie familiarity about our family. He knew about my aunt's bakery business, my brother's recent soccer trophy, even the exact breed of our old family dog that passed away years ago. My discomfort grew as the evening progressed. Eric's presence felt intrusive, like a shadow looming over our festive mood. He seemed to watch us with a keen, almost predatory interest. I caught my mom exchanging worried glances with my dad. Curiosity got the better of me. I sneaked away to my dad's study and started searching online for any mention of Eric related to our family. Nothing. It was as if he didn't exist. That's when I decided to confront him. I found him alone in the living room, staring intently at our family photos. "Who are you, really?" I demanded. Eric turned, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. His reply was chilling. "I'm the son of Linda," he said quietly. Linda was my aunt, my dad's sister, who disappeared when I was just a baby. The family never talked about her, and I never knew why. "She was shunned by your family before you were born. I grew up hearing about all of you, wondering why my mother was cast away." I felt a knot in my stomach. This revelation seemed to unearth a part of our family's past that we never knew existed, a part that was dark and potentially sinister. I ran to get my parents, my heart pounding. They confronted Eric with a mix of disbelief and horror. "Why are you here?" my dad asked, his voice barely a whisper. "To find out why you abandoned my mother," Eric said, his voice cracking with emotion. "To find out why I had to grow up without knowing my own family." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. My parents looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. It was clear they knew more than they had let on. Just as my dad opened his mouth to speak, the lights flickered and went out. A storm had been brewing all evening, and it seemed to have finally knocked out the power. The room plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the flickering candles on the dinner table. In that dim light, Eric's face looked different, twisted by a mix of sadness and anger. The festive atmosphere had turned heavy and suffocating, a sense of dread filling the room. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within as we all sat there, trapped in the revelation and the darkness. In the candlelit darkness, my father finally spoke, his voice heavy with a burden long carried. "Linda. She was involved in something terrible, something that threatened to tear our family apart. We had to make a hard choice, for the safety of everyone," he confessed. Eric's face contorted with a mix of pain and anger. "You left her to fend for herself, with a child," he accused, his voice rising above the howl of the wind outside. The tension in the room was palpable. I felt caught between a past I never knew and a present that was unraveling rapidly. My siblings clung to my mother, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Your mother, she wasn't well," my mom added, her voice trembling. "We tried to help, but she refused. Leaving was her choice, not ours." Eric's demeanor shifted suddenly. He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "You think she left by choice? She was driven away by your secrets and lies." I felt like I was in a nightmare, each revelation more horrifying than the last. My family, the picture of normalcy, was now shadowed by a dark, hidden past. Eric, the forgotten guest, was a living reminder of a sin we never knew we bore. Just as the confrontation reached its peak, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Startled, we all turned towards the sound. In the brief moment of distraction, Eric vanished. We searched the house frantically, but he was gone, as suddenly as he had appeared. The storm outside raged on, making it impossible to venture out. We were left in the eerie silence of our home, the echoes of Eric's revelations haunting us. In the light of the next day, the police were called, but there was no trace of Eric. It was as if he was a ghost, a specter of the past come to confront us with our family's sins. My parents were shaken, their usual composure shattered by the events of the previous night. The following days were a blur. We tried to return to our normal lives, but the mask of normalcy had been irrevocably torn. Conversations about Linda and what had happened years ago started to surface. My family was forced to confront the truth that had been hidden for so long. And so, our favorite holiday was now marked by a haunting memory. A memory that proved that sometimes the most terrifying horrors are not those of the supernatural, but those that lie buried in the truths we choose to forget. Thanksgiving was always a big deal in our family, not just for the feast, but for the hunting trip we took every year without fail. It was a tradition passed down for generations, a bonding experience that I, admittedly, had grown to cherish. This year, though, our tradition turned into something out of a nightmare. We set out at dawn, as we always did. The air was crisp, the sky a dull gray, typical for late November. Our group split into two, with my dad, my cousin Mike, and me heading towards the northern part of the woods. The others, including my uncle and brother, took the southern route. The forest was quiet, eerily so. Usually the morning chatter of birds filled the air, but that day it was like the wildlife decided to stay silent. I brushed it off as odd, but nothing more. We walked deeper into the woods, following a trail we knew by heart. That's when we found the first sign that something was off. A deer, but not like any scene from a hunt. It was brutal, the poor thing torn apart in a way that no animal could have done. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine, the excitement of the hunt replaced by a sense of dread. "Dad, this doesn't look right," I said, pointing to the carcass. He frowned, examining the scene. "Let's be careful. Could be a bear," he suggested, though I saw the uncertainty in his eyes. We decided to move on, but the further we went, the more we felt like we were not alone. It was a sensation I couldn't shake off, the feeling of being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking behind us. "Guys, I think we should head back," Mike whispered. His usual jovial demeanor was gone, replaced by a seriousness I rarely saw in him. We agreed, turning around to retrace our steps. That's when we heard it, a snap of a twig, subtle yet in the absolute silence of the forest, it sounded like a gunshot. We froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Another snap, closer this time. We weren't alone. Someone, or something, was out there with us, stalking us. The realization hit us like a cold wave. We weren't hunters anymore. We were prey. Panic set in. We started moving faster, trying to be quiet, but the fear made us clumsy. Branches cracked under our feet. Leaves rustled louder than we wanted. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. We communicated with hand signals, too afraid to make a sound. The familiar trail seemed foreign, every turn making me more anxious. I kept imagining someone jumping out at us, the thought alone making my skin crawl. Then, the worst happened. Mike tripped on a root, crashing to the ground with a loud thud. He yelped in pain, clutching his ankle. My dad and I rushed to him, but our concern for Mike was overshadowed by the fear of what his cry might have attracted. "Dad, we need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, helping Mike up. We half walked, half dragged ourselves through the underbrush, the weight of being watched never leaving us. The feeling of being hunted was relentless, a predator just biding its time. We didn't see anyone, but the signs were there. The occasional rustle of leaves, the faint sound of footsteps that weren't ours. It was like being in a horror movie, only this was real. Far too real. After what felt like an eternity, we finally saw the edge of the woods, the open field that led to our family's cabin. Never had I been so relieved to see that old wooden structure. We burst out of the forest, into the clearing, and didn't stop until we reached the cabin. Once inside, we locked the doors and windows, checking them twice, maybe 3 times. My uncle and brother were already there, having returned earlier. They looked at us, confused by our panicked state. We explained what happened, the details pouring out in a frantic, jumbled mess. My uncle's face grew serious as he listened, his usual skepticism absent. He believed us. I could see it in his eyes. That night, we didn't sleep much. Every sound made us jump, every shadow a reminder of the terror we had experienced. We were safe inside the cabin, but the feeling of being hunted lingered, a predator in the shadows we couldn't see. The next morning, we were a group shaken to its core. The jovial atmosphere of Thanksgiving was replaced by a tense, uneasy silence. After a brief discussion, we agreed to cut our trip short and head back home. None of us mentioned it, but the fear of being followed lingered in our minds. We packed up in record time, eager to leave the forest and its unseen horrors behind. The drive back was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts, replaying the events over and over. I couldn't shake off the image of the mutilated deer and the feeling of being watched. Once home, we contacted the local authorities. My dad and uncle explained everything, from the disturbing discovery in the woods to the unnerving sensation of being stalked. The officers took notes, their expressions a mix of concern and skepticism. They promised to investigate, but their nonchalant attitude made it clear they didn't fully believe us. A few days later, we received a call from the police. They had scoured the area we described, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of any stalker, no more mutilated animals. It was as if the forest had swallowed up any evidence of the previous day's terror. Life slowly returned to normal, but the experience stayed with us. My cousin Mike's ankle healed, but the psychological scars were harder to mend. We talked about the incident in hushed tones, speculating on what or who could have been behind it. But without any concrete evidence, our theories remained just that, theories. The hunting trip, once a cherished family tradition, was never the same again. The following year, we decided against it. The fear and the memories were still too raw, the questions unanswered. The forest that had once been a place of bonding and adventure had turned into a source of nightmares. I always loved driving at night, the roads more peaceful, the world quieter. That's why I didn't mind the late-night drive to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. I expected a smooth journey, just me and the empty roads. But that night, something changed my love for night drives forever. About an hour into the drive, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A car, far enough not to be a concern, yet there was something unsettling about how it maintained its distance. I shrugged it off initially, focusing on the music from the radio and the road ahead, but as miles passed, my unease grew. The car was always there, like a shadow trailing me. Whenever I sped up or slowed down, it did the same. It's just a coincidence, I told myself, trying to shake off the growing anxiety. I decided to test my theory. I took a random exit, then another, and a few turns after that. Each time the car followed. My heart started pounding. This wasn't a coincidence. I was being followed. I pulled into a gas station, hoping to find someone to share my concern with, but it was deserted. I glanced at my phone. No signal. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. When I looked up, the car was there, parked a few rows behind me, just sitting in the darkness. Panic set in. I got back on the road, the mysterious car still behind me. My mind raced with questions. Who was following me? What did they want? The empty roads, once a source of calm, now felt menacing. I considered my options. Going to the police would be the logical step, but with no phone signal and the nearest station miles away, I felt trapped. The only thing I knew for sure was I needed to keep moving. The road stretched on, the car a constant presence behind me. Every turn I took, it was there. I felt like prey being hunted, my car the only barrier between me and my pursuer. In a moment of desperate courage, I pulled over, my heart hammering in my chest. This ends now, I thought. I got out of the car, ready to confront whoever was tormenting me. But when I approached the car, my blood turned cold. The driver's seat was empty. No sign of anyone. Just an abandoned car, its engine still running. The realization hit me like a wave. I was alone, yet not alone. The fear escalated into terror. Where was the driver? How did they vanish so quickly? I rushed back to my car, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I had to get to my parents' house. It was the only safe place I could think of. The drive was a blur, my mind reeling from the empty car and the unseen threat. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting the car to reappear. But it was gone, vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the familiar lights of my parents' house. Relief washed over me as I pulled into the driveway. I was safe, but the mystery of the night's events lingered, a shadow over my Thanksgiving reunion. I sat in the driveway for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. The warm glow from my parents' house was a stark contrast to the cold dread I had just experienced. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and hurried inside, not even glancing back at the dark road. My parents were surprised to see me so shaken. I explained what had happened, every detail pouring out in a frantic stream. They listened, their expressions changing from concern to disbelief to worry. My dad wanted to call the police, but I stopped him, insisting that there was no point. The car was gone, and with it, any proof of my story. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow in my room a reminder of the mysterious car and its driver. My mind raced with questions. Had I imagined it all? Was I just overreacting to a random driver on the road? But the image of the empty car, its engine still running, was vivid and undeniable. The next morning, my parents suggested we go out for a walk, thinking it might help clear my head. Reluctantly, I agreed. As we walked, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the car again. It was broad daylight, but the fear from the night before hadn't left me. When we returned home, there was a police car in the driveway. A sense of dread filled me. Had the driver come back? Were we in danger? The officer greeted us, explaining that a car matching the description I had given my parents was found abandoned a few miles down the road. It had been involved in a series of incidents over the past few weeks, he said. My story had fit the pattern. They had no leads on the driver, no explanation for the strange behavior. I listened, feeling a mix of relief and unease. The confirmation that it wasn't just my imagination was comforting, but the unresolved nature of it all was unsettling. The officer assured us that they would keep an eye on the area and advised me to be cautious. Months later, the police called to inform us that the owner of the car had been found, but he had passed away due to unrelated causes before the incidents began. The car had been stolen shortly after his death, but they were never able to track down the thief.